of the issues that you'll find with the FE motors is that the oiling systems from the factory, they were kind of restrictive. They weren't really conducive to high RPM. Now, one thing about this engine is this is a truck engine that we're doing. It's not really going to see a lot of really high RPMs. However, there's a couple of areas of the block that are of genuine concern, even for a street motor. They had certain issues. This is a 7/16 inch drill bit. Now, there's an oil passageway. It goes from the pump. If you look at the top here, the pump mounts here. This is my oil pump mounting bracket, and then there's a hole here. This hole is tiny. I mean, it just, I don't know what Ford was thinking, but it's basically an as-cast hole, and they really didn't modify it much. The hole on the pump is much larger, and there's a big mismatch here. And also, there's not really, I mean, the hole going down here is really pretty small and restrictive. So what you want to do on this, the other oil hole going across is pretty big. I mean, they got this out to 7/16, but they got this little tiny hole here. You want to modify this. You want to take a 7/16 drill bit, and we want to run that hole up here. Now, up at the top, you can't run all the way through with it, because up at the top here, what this oil passage does is it runs up here, and then it makes basically a 90-degree turn. This 90-degree turn here is also really restrictive. If you look at the oil passage on the old pump, I mean, it's huge. And so what you have is you have this pump blasting all this oil up against this little tiny hole here, and it's a big restriction. So what we do on this is you want to take a 5/8 drill bit, or you can use a Dremel, but I like to take a 5/8 drill bit, and I just want to kind of open that up. Now, you can't really open it up too much. You can't go, you know, obviously all the way through, because there's a 90-degree turn here. So we're going to open up the top side of this hole, right? And then you have to take a very fine Dremel, and you have to kind of port that. You got to kind of get that corner there so that, you know, there's a smooth transition. And then, of course, coming up to that 90-degree turn, you're going to drill up here with your 7/16 drill bit. And what that does, this is a really common mod for the FE. I mean, every FE I've ever done, I've done this to it, and it seems to really help the lubrication system a lot. There's actually a lot of other oil mods that you can do to this block. The main oil galley drilled through the center, a lot of guys will drill that out to 7/16, at least 3/4 of the way with a long drill bit. But that is for, I mean, you're really getting into extreme high RPM builds and stuff there. This engine is not going to see that kind of RPM. Camshaft that's going in it is pretty mild. It is a hydraulic roller, but it's designed, we're basically building a truck engine here that we want to get a lot of torque and performance out. We don't really need to get crazy with all of that because the RPMs are not going to be in such a place, but this one mod here, you just really don't want to let this go. You need to do it. There's a really big mismatch with the oil gallery hole that meets the main bearing. The oil hole on the number 1 main, you'll notice, is a lot smaller than the rest of them. We also want to drill that out, but you don't want to drill all the way through to the cam bearing. We drill almost all the way through, and we leave probably about that much of a space there because we don't want to get into that cam bearing bore. Now, what you'll notice is, for some reason they're like this. Now, we need to kind of correct that because you got a big mismatch there. So what we do, and you can even see where the imprint of the old bearing was, you can kind of see on this one where that hole was right there. So it's a big mismatch. So that's another thing we're going to do. In addition to opening up the oil flow from the pump, we want to take and come in here with a Dremel tool, and we want to relieve that. Hey guys, so let me walk you through a couple of the mods that we did here, a couple of the upgrades on this block. One of the things that you'll notice is there's an oil drain back hole here, but the hole is quite a bit smaller than this. From the factory, they just kind of punch it out and leave it there. And then also you'll notice we added another hole over here. What this is, you want the oil that's in the lifter valley here, we want it to drain out. We don't really want a thick puddle of oil in here. There's not a lot you can do on this side because there's really no place to drill a hole to drain it. They do have drain holes here, but what you want to try to do is you want to try to get the oil to drain in the front and the back of the block. And if you'll notice in the back, we opened up these oil drains back here too and tried to lower the level so that the oil would drain better. Because what happens is if the oil builds up in here, and you're going to get some buildup, there's not a lot you can do about it, but if the oil builds up in the lifter valley, it causes what we call windage. Now windage, what that is it's oil draining back down onto the cam and the crank, and the cam is rotating in there and it starts whipping that oil. Imagine yourself trying to run through a swimming pool full of water. Say you're waist deep in a swimming pool full of water. There's some restriction there. You can't really run full speed. Well, the goal with this lifter valley oiling is we don't really want a large volume of oil draining down onto the camshaft, because what that does is it restricts the movement of the crankshaft. It actually takes more horsepower. Windage robs horsepower from the engine. It also aerates the oil, and all of that oil that drains down on the cam, well, the crankshaft is right underneath the cam, so it's going to drain right back down on the crank, and the crank's going to start whipping that oil. And now we have a large volume of oil that is resisting or restricting the movement of the cam and the crank, and it actually robs a little bit of horsepower from the engine. So it's not a significant difference, but it's one thing that is a good idea to do. We took and we opened this up here, took a Dremel in here, and we went down to the level of the oil here so that the oil could drain out and it doesn't build up in here. And it's going to help a lot. And also the oil drains out here and helps to lubricate the timing chain area here and keeps the timing chain cool and so forth. So, and we also opened this hole up and lowered it so that the oil could drain down here easier. So that's one mod that you can do, and it is helpful. It does make a difference. We've got this oil hole here that was a big restriction, and so what we did, you remember how small that was, we took our 7/16 drill bit and we went ahead and drilled that out. We went ahead and opened up that hole. Now again, there's a 90-degree turn up here, so we can only go so far. We equalized the size of this hole with the other gallery here. If you look at this other gallery here, we didn't drill this one. The factory already had this one at 7/16. So 7/16 goes right into it. So we opened up the passageway from the pump and made it the same size. This is really beneficial when it comes to oiling down here, because this is always known to be a big restriction. Now on the bottom side, what we did, where the pump mounts to this thing, is we took and we opened that up to 5/8. Now we've got a hole here. Now where this 90-degree turn is, we went ahead and took a Dremel in there and we kind of smoothed that out and ported that thing and opened it up. And now we have a much larger hole here that actually matches. We don't have this big mismatch with our pump. You saw earlier how big the outlet on the pump is. It's huge. So we made the hole here very similar to in size to our pump outlet so that we don't really have a restriction here, and then we opened up the flow. This is really going to help the flow of this engine. This is a very common mod for the FE engine, and I highly recommend that you do it. Another thing we did here is we drilled out the front oil gallery hole and we made it the same size as the rest of them. For some reason Ford made this hole smaller, I'm not sure why, but we opened it up about 60 thousandths, so we made it the same size as the other oil holes, and that helped that. Now we didn't drill all the way through. We went down about 3/4 of the way, about to right there. We didn't drill through into the cam because we didn't want to interfere with the cam bore. But we did open that up. On the bottom side, another thing we did was the bearings have a big mismatch. And you'll notice that when you see it. So the bearings have a big mismatch down on the bottom. So what we did is we took and we opened those up and we made that match the bearing. If you look at our bearing now, you'll notice that the hole that we modified here is very close to matching the hole in the bearing. If we put our bearing in there, you can see that now we've gotten that oil gallery hole to really match the hole in the bearing, and that's a really good upgrade. It's something that really just helps the thing oil better. And you see that they've all been kind of modified there. The center hole matches up pretty good. We made it slightly larger, but we had to offset these, and then the back one, we just enlarged it slightly because it's pretty centered to the bearing. So those are some oil mods that I would recommend doing. Took a while to do it, you know, with the Dremel. You just got to take your time and drill that stuff out. And we took a very fine sand cone and we polished these and made sure that they were all deburred and so forth.